So, welcome everybody to Galeda, and today I have Gary Mills, somebody who has about 30 years of experience, and I'm going to have to read this because honestly, I can't remember this. So, back office technology solutions, private wealth family offices, hedge funds, fund funds, private equity funds, and their administrators and accounting firms. Now, that sounds like a big mouthful. It also sounds very complicated. But I will promise you this, when you speak to Gary, that isn't the case because he's a great translator of that type of thing. So he's co-host the Investment Industry Group, NCSA Alternative Investment Committee between 2008 and 2014, served as a strategic advisor for technology to Industry Group Family Office Exchange, and is currently a steering committee member on the faculty of Larry Krauss Family Office Technology. Did I get that name correct? Krauss?
Indeed.
Fantastic. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and start asking questions. So, just a little bit about your background, apart from what I just mentioned, so that's the mechanics of it, and who you are as a person, so who you are, just to the audience so they understand that.
Yeah, I certainly won't go to repeat everything that you so accurately described, and I appreciate that. Uh, so starting about, I guess, 1995, I was introduced to a small software firm that I went to work for that was building portfolio partnership and partnership tax technology for the groups that Gav mentioned. And have been doing that ever since for a number of software firms, accounting firms, fund administrators, and have done so in a number of different roles, ranging from software development, project or product management, consulting, uh, the product marketing, and in fact as well sales. So I've had the opportunity to have these perspectives, all of these perspectives, and how they interrelate or don't with each other. And I guess as Gav mentioned, become quite I believe to be a fairly detailed translator, taking business requirements and translating them into specifications, how to run a project, what to focus on, focusing on benefits to the intended client, be they internal or external. So those are the areas I've worked in. Starting a year ago, branched out on my own. That came as a result of a family office group. One of the individuals who ran that group, who I'd known since I started working in this area back in '95, said, "Hey, we have this problem. We know that you have fixed it before while at EY, managing and interpreting and capturing data from U.S. federal tax schedule K1, which most of the groups that we discussed or I mentioned are all using, in the United States anyway, investment partnerships. The family
So
offices do so, and so forth."
just for clarity, EU, I know who that is, but that's Ernst & Young, correct?
I'm sorry, say again?
EU, you said. It's not just, sorry, EY, it's Ernst & Young, yeah?
Ernst & Young, sorry, yes.
Yeah, okay. Cool. I suppose the next thing would be, why do you serve, or why are you doing now what you do? What is your why?
Well, part of it is after being, doing this for all of these years, one of my mentors, who I won't embarrass him by naming, said, "You've been doing it all these years. Why do you want to work for somebody else? You've got the knowledge. Go hang out a shingle and do it yourself. And here's what you're going to charge." And I had ignored that advice a couple of times, and I figured now was finally the time to do it. In particular, because after giving this one webinar to a family office group, I got a lot of calls saying, "Wait a minute, you mean you can look at what we do?" And well, first of all, we found that 70% of private wealth family offices were unhappy with their technology. Well, if that isn't an entree, I don't know what is.
I
Uh,
find that I found that amazing when you said that.
well, yeah, I mean, and what was more fascinating was, when you went to many of these same family offices, well, why aren't
Hmm.
you doing anything about it instead of complaining each year at the end of tax season? Uh, and it was, it's like, if you're going to keep making this mistake, it's, if you want help fixing it, I'm independent. I'm
Hmm.
not beholden to anyone, although I've worked with many of them. I'm not beholden to any software vendor. I
Hmm.
can come in and dispassionately take a look at your operations. When I think operations, it's the trinity, if you will, or the three-legged stool, if you will, of people, process, and yes, the technology that support the first two.
Hmm.
And doesn't there are some offices will say take a look, and when you come back and say you're in a good place, you could go invest more money in it, but for minimal gain, then they come away with the assurance that because I'm not in it to try to sell implementation. I'll
Yeah.
tell them what the way things are,
Yes.
and that has drawn quite a bit of interest. And I'm at a stage in my life and career where this works for me.
Is that an American expression, or is it Tennessee that says that they've got no dog in the fight?
Well, if in independence and unbiased, yeah, I guess it does translate to that. Indeed.
Which is probably a good thing when you're talking about the numbers that they probably invest to actually fix some of those problems. At least from what I've seen over the last sort of three
Well, and
decades.
their issues are different. Because when this came up at a family office industry group
Mm,
conference last November, and they
mm.
posed the question, "How many of you are satisfied with your technology?" And 70% said, "Not." And then I'm furiously typing into the chat bar saying, "How about a follow-up question that says why?" You know, uh,
Did
and
you
and
get that
in fact,
question?
and then I gave like 6 options. Is it pain points? Is it's costing too much money, or too much of it is manual, or anything else you cared to share? And it was eye-opening,
Hmm,
and which led to me writing several entry posts into LinkedIn saying, okay, this is what I've learned.
hmm.
Here's what you can do about it. And oh, by the way, it's the end of tax season. Happy New Year. Here's the resolution you might consider making for the new year before all heck breaks loose, into the new season.
Yeah,
And here's how you might go about it. Now,
yeah.
there was some response back to it and things like that.
Hmm,
And I said, we know not all of you are going to do it. You don't have to go hire me.
hmm.
Doesn't have to be me. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a big consulting firm who's actually angling for the implementation afterward. Um,
Do
or
you
if
think?
it's or you can do it yourselves. But
Yeah,
here's an outline of the roadmap for doing so. Anyway,
I think very often the bigger the company is, or the more money that they have, that they think they need a massive outfit to fix the problem. Whereas actually they'd probably be better off with somebody that they can say, right, okay, that is capable of doing it, but they've got more control over, because the disparity between the two organizations, where one is literally bigger than the other. Do you think that is so? What would you consider to be the best option there?
well,
Oh,
it's interesting how it generally plays out. I mean, when I many years ago, because I was doing things before I was introduced to alternative investments back in the 90s.
hmm,
uh, I found, and would not say this publicly, certainly having since I was working for a consulting firm at the time, but
hmm,
how many times do big companies engage a consulting firm to tell them what they already knew, but now they can go back to the board and say, well, so and so, this big consulting firm wrote me a 100-page report that tells me I was right. Now they don't frame it like that, but that's effectively what it was back in those days. Um, Now,
uh,
in the case of family offices,
hmm,
or private wealth family offices, the that's usually not the concern. Although the biases on where to go to. Do you use the same firm that's providing your current software?
hmm,
Well, that's not going to give you an unbiased response.
Hmm.
but it will either, they may, I mean, if they have a separate group doing the analyses than the ones who sold them the solution they have now.
Hmm.
There's no right answer, Gavin. It's, um, it's not always the biggest firm will want, the big four, unit of, the consulting group within a big four, American term,
Hmm.
accounting firm in the US.
Hmm.
Um, but usually you just need somebody who can go in, ask and ask the questions and listen, or not even ask the questions. Ask one question: what's troubling you? What issues do you see that you're even the rationale for bringing me in? And then
Hmm.
shut up and listen. And
Hmm.
then when you do ask questions, it's open ended to either
Hmm.
confirm or clarify what you think you heard, because people love to know that they've been heard when you play that back to them. And that's not being sarcastic. It's true. It's, did I really hear this thing appropriately?
Hmm.
So some of those are the approaches, and then confirming what it doesn't take a huge consulting team to go do that, at
Hmm.
least in the areas that I'm working in.
Hmm.
Um, you know, in other places, if it's a very very large organization with all kinds of moving parts, sure, you bring in a team that has experience in each of those areas. But in my little niche, um, you could go with a big firm, you can go with me.
Hmm.
It's it's, or you can just don't hire or engage somebody, because you can hire a single person into your firm who's going to be there not just for this engagement but afterward. In fact, I
Hmm.
remember questioning during a conference where they said, "Yeah, we hired somebody to do the implementation." I said,
Hmm.
"Okay, where did you hire them from? Tell me it's not the company that's doing the implementation. You want somebody representing yourselves." "Oh yeah, we did, and that person's going to be working for us well beyond this." So
Right.
now you actually have that level of independence, and it's a cross check on what that firm is doing for you. And you
Hmm.
should have that for the money that are inevitably spending.
Yeah, which is usually not a small amount.
Yeah, never is.
Right. Okay. So I'm just going to stop there for a second and do a quick sponsor shout out at Specular Consulting. They provide expert advice in the IT PMO transformation and cybersecurity space, and they do that on hourly rates. They are different than other organizations because they are all experts in their fields, but you pay for them on an hourly basis when needed. And that means it can also be as a service, augmentation, or just simply a one-off, as is piece of consulting. Now, the difference between them and everybody else, aside from that, aside from the fact they are experts, they tend to have a lot of experience underneath their belts, is the simple fact that they also then, when they leave, they hand it back over to the company so they can actually utilize what has been implemented or created. And that, I don't know if you've ever been there yourselves, in the IT space can be very difficult to have. So with that, I'm just going to say that their web address, which is Specular Consulting, that is SPECULO Consulting, one word, .com. That's specularconsulting.com. And with that, let's get back to Gary. Right. Sorry about that. I know it always interrupts, but it's just something that as part of the sponsorship. So this is where it gets interesting, because I start asking questions that most people, I think, very often just don't even consider. So, how do you see leadership, or how have you seen leadership? I know you've already mentioned you had mentors, but I mean, how do you see it as one of the ones that has sort of done there, got the ticket, and been through the hard times?
The very simple, and this is maybe a little bit repetitive, but it's imperative that leaders view the operations or the functions that they serve through the eyes of their clients, whether those clients are internal or external.
Hmm.
You don't have all the right answers, and claiming that you do, even if you do, it still plays a whole lot better if you stop, listen, ask open-ended questions, and so forth. The products and the services for which you're responsible have to deliver the solutions with the benefits that are embraced by those clients, not the
Hmm.
features not the features, and I'm being very purposefully, you know, segregating or differentiating between benefits and features. You don't think about the features that you think are benefits without the
Hmm.
perspective to understand that they just aren't. You
Hmm.
have to, that's where your focus should be. And it isn't always the case. I have worked for firms in both sales roles and in product development roles where we know what's best for you.
Hmm.
And, or worse, they come in without having asked those questions first. So they're just blithely throwing down marketing sheets on all of their products and waiting to see which one attracts the prospect and then delve into that. Well, why are you wasting their time? If you'd asked those questions in advance, you could be drilling down and showing that you heard the client. Um, and by the way, this plays whether you're talking about working with clients, whether you're talking, if you are whether you're in product management or development,
Hmm.
listen first. You go be that person. My very first job out of school,
Hmm.
long before I got into this work with family offices and hedge funds, I
Hmm.
was working for it was at that time the largest title insurance company in the US.
Hmm.
And they had no technology. Back then, the technology they needed was more word processing type stuff.
Hmm.
But before I ever tried to make that, to develop something, I went into the offices where worked with clients who were buying new homes,
Hmm.
sat there and participated in it so I could see it through the eyes of the person who were going to be using this. What a concept. Actually listen to your users. Uh, and if they had ideas, great. Or if you can see from what your knowledge is, do so. But the bottom line is you got to look at whatever you're doing, whether it's consulting, sales, marketing, um, or product development, do it through the eyes of who your client base is going to be. And if you haven't learned that, then you're not going to have very, very happy clients.
Do you think that that's because tech companies, or just B2B in general, they make the mistake of thinking they're just selling to one single entity rather than it being you're talking to the C-suite, you're talking to operations, you're talking to the literally the organizations based on what's being offered might actually involve offering that and making sure that's understood to each individual part of that organization.
Well, certainly there is that. A very simplistic example of it
Hmm.
is, and I'll throw a shout out to my bride
Hmm.
when we go out and buy a car, and if my wife happens to say, "Does it come in red?" and then you see them scurrying around trying to find something in the inventory or in a close by dealership that would have it in red, when the
Hmm.
next question should have been, "Ma'am, is that important to you?"
Yeah.
Why figure out what's important to the client and don't just glom onto everything that they say in the expectation that that's now the biggest priority. First of
Hmm.
all, it's embarrassing.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, things like that. So you got to ask the right questions. What's important? What are they looking to solve? What are their goals? What are their priorities? If you don't know those things in advance, you're wasting everybody's time.
Hmm. Do you think that's maybe the reason why people are sort of the sort of that it seems to have been an all-time low of the? I mean, nobody's ever liked sales. I mean, just to be fair, we all know that. But there seems to be an all-time low as far as that's concerned. You get thousands of emails, etc., where nobody has actually talked to anybody, hasn't really researched anything, whether it be the sector that they're actually going into, the target audience, or anything like that, even remotely. And then the 6 people that pick up telephones do well, and that seems to have got lost, don't you think?
Very much so, and examples of that all the time. I mean, if we look at and yes, sarcasm intended to some extent here, the latest shiny object is, hey,
Mm.
we've got AI.
Yeah.
And okay, AI is a tool that certainly can make your product be a technology, well, it's going to be technology at some level, more
Mm,
efficient. That's fine, but you're not buying AI, you're buying whatever that widget is or that piece of software is that improves your life somehow, whether it's keeping track of clients or keeping track of outstanding issues or prioritizing them based upon the number of complaints that you've received in a certain area.
mm,
You're not buying AI, you're buying a priority, how do you prioritize your developers or maintenance teams to address things?
mm,
So, but why are we focusing on AI? There is during the Olympics, um, at least in my area in the U.S., there's been a commercial floating around, and I don't even remember which product it was,
mm.
saying, "Hey, you're there with your small child who's really excited about this one Olympian, and hey, I'm going to use whatever the AI product was. Help
Mm.
my daughter write a letter to her favorite Olympian."
I've heard of that. Yes.
And I'm looking at my wife going, seriously, you realize every star now with if the words are exactly like that in the
Yeah.
request, there will be billions of identical letters going from little boys and girls to their favorite Olympian, and it'll be like it was just a copying machine.
Well, I mean,
You know,
if a child was doing that, definitely, because this is the thing that I think people miss. So I've been configuring and using AI and machine learning for over half a decade. So you do it is what the truism that always existed in IT, which is garbage in, garbage out. That has not changed.
true.
Um, but I suppose that's quite a good segue into something that maybe since we're talking about that, and then we're talking about shiny object syndrome. Have you seen something like that that was a real downside where it's had a negative impact? So, from a leadership perspective, where somebody's just, they've 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 bought that product with those features and benefits, and then you think, okay, that what would be sort of a good example of that, sort of a downside from a leadership perspective, where they just, yeah, got it wrong.
Well, a lot of it was, it depends who's running the show.
Hmm.
And I won't name company names, but some
No,
of my ex-employers would
no.
will recognize themselves.
No.
Will where it was, at one point in time we have great people, proven
Hmm.
expertise,
Hmm.
proven approach, and yes, the technology to support it.
Hmm.
Where that was turned on its ear and it became, oh, we have great technology and we've got some good people that know how to utilize the technology.
Hmm.
Well, when you're putting out new technology into an area where it's always been, let's say, the partner who is at the end, they're the final source of review before signing that tax return or something like that. And you're now telling them, we know better. We built some software. It's going to do it for you. You don't need to spend the time on it.
Mhm.
And I can tell you firsthand, had conversations with people on the receiving end of that saying, now you got a brand new product from the technology department who never consulted us, and I'm supposed to accept on faith that they've done all this right before I sign my name and my reputation to it? Not going to happen.
So they found tech used, end product, and nobody had
I mean, it
asked.
may well be spectacular.
No,
Not
no,
in
no,
year one,
no, no,
not in year one,
no.
probably. But
They then had to literally put their. So if I understood this correctly, just make sure I have. So they got an end product. They were signing off, and that was going to the U.S. government.
mhm.
I wonder
and
how they
and
thought that
because
was going to play out.
look, in all of these firms over, for many many years, you
Mm,
have the staff and seniors, and I'm
mm,
working my way up the food chain,
mm,
doing this work. It's overseen by the managers who are checking off on it, and then the senior
mm,
managers before it goes to the partner, making sure that all of this work, whether it's an audit or tax compliance or whatever,
mm,
and then it has to be signed off. I mean, if it's tax, it's the tax returns or whatever,
mm,
signed off by the partner.
mm,
But the partner is the one who hired those people under him or her in their engagement teams, who
Hmm.
knows what they're capable of, knows
Hmm.
the mistakes they've made in the past and learned from, and knows
Yeah.
who they can rely on. Now you're being asked to rely on a piece of software that's being run by people who are relatively new to the firm and certainly new to the process.
Hmm.
Uh, and wait, you want me to sign my name without looking at this first? No, you're not allowed to because we're doing this for you. And that, by the way, was in the time after COVID, when a number of partners in the big four
Hmm.
found their ways into the second tier firms and have done very well for themselves in those roles. And those second tier firms, second tier, not second rate, but just further down
Yeah,
in
from the
terms of
side.
size,
Hmm.
gained experience they probably would have never had a shot at, thanks to how the world changed for the larger firms.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Um, I suppose since we've gone into the dark side, let's
A little,
merge into the
we've dipped our toe into it, yes, to mix
light.
metaphors.
Well, let's not disappear into the shadows today. Um, so I suppose then let's go in the other direction. So what have been the upsides, from a leadership perspective, and also, maybe but from your experience, something that sticks in your mind that would be useful to the audience. So, what would be something you'd say, right, okay, this is an upside of it.
Sure.
Upside.
There's, I mean, I've been privileged because I've both worked and managed in everything. I've said this a little bit earlier in software
Mm,
development, product management, sales, product marketing. And
mm,
because of having that experience in all those areas, I've experienced the different perspectives through, from each of those roles, and gain the opportunity to be able to translate one into the other. Hey,
mm,
this is a business problem. Okay, the technologists don't speak your language, so
mm,
you need somebody who can work both sides of the street. Listen to the business side, interpret it, and turn it into specs, and then specs that from which the developers can do their work, do so efficiently, and get it more likely to get it right the first time. It's never always right the first time, but
mm,
you're getting to that point much faster. Um, it's the most I've been witness so many times to the frustrating sides of a business analyst gets brought in from the technology side who doesn't have any background on the business side,
mm,
and the frustration because it's like being dropped into another country in another language without you know having your fancy phone now that you can speak in one language and have it come back out in another.
mm,
You need somebody who's facile in handling both sides.
mm,
Confirm what the needs are with the business side, and then translate that in. I've been fortunate to have that. I think that the if anybody who's going to be put into that role, product management or product or project management,
mm,
should be spending time with the client, and just you know spending a lot of time with it, not just taking notes in a conference room, but
mm,
getting out on the product floor, wherever the group is working, so he or she can see for themselves what the problems are,
mm,
and listen to the people who are griping about this or that or whatever, because they've got the insights.
mm,
um, what I learned from over time was, and this started or showed itself very well in my first role when I got to Ernst and Young in 2012. It was to help build out the next generation technology,
mm,
and I found this one thing, interpreting K1 or interpreting these tax forms, that when I got there, you had staff, meaning the lowest level, or seniors, the next level up, sitting there jacked up on caffeine at midnight with binders full of paper, typing them into spreadsheets. Well, that was efficient, he said sarcastically. Um,
That was 2012.
that
Wow.
was 2012.
That is
And
long
and
ago.
and it took it relatively quickly. We got something up. It wasn't perfect the first year. Heck, it wasn't perfect the second year.
Yeah.
But what I would do at the end of each year is I would put out a survey, open questions. What worked?
Right.
What didn't work? What would you like to see added?
Hmm.
And I took those in and had somebody assigned to list all of them, put them together, put it back out to the group, and had them vote on it from amongst the clients. What a concept. Let the clients decide what they need.
Okay, so you actually handed that list to the
Back to the
client.
users. Absolutely.
Okay, so I think Microsoft does that or did that with I think Teams, which obviously is a
Yep.
very
And
very
Teams is a nice tool to makes that possible. Absolutely.
yeah. Sometimes with those numbers, I think it gets it's you don't know what because it's so broad. I sometimes wonder whether they lose focus on fixing some of the core things that they should.
That may well be the case because you've got a global
Yeah,
presence here, a global market, where I'm just dealing with it was different offices that
with
were doing slightly different
yeah.
documents.
Mm.
But the point was, it, it accomplished two things. It allowed us to focus truly on what should have been added to the product next. With
Mm.
with a limited budget, I had to focus on that, or I had to have my team focus on it. But
Mm.
more importantly, it engaged the clients. Hey, you've got skin in this game. You've got. I'm sorry, I'm using another Americanism, I guess, but
I think
um,
everybody understands that.
fair enough. But it gave them. They said, "Hey, we're invested in this. They're they're going to build out what we told them we wanted to have."
Mm.
And that worked very well because once we rolled out the next version, we would take from those people who were most vocal.
Mm.
Hey, you wanted this? Come test it before we roll it out to the general audience. And
Well,
again,
invest.
giving them feeling invested in what we were doing.
Mm. And just help. I'm curious because this is tax. Nobody loves the tax
No.
man or person. So I presume they were quite passionate about getting some of this stuff fixed.
Oh, absolutely. Because it was, we here's one, and this is about as technical as I'll get into the tax world.
Mm.
My first year, all of my sample tax forms that I was using
Mm.
were from EY. Well, a lot of these particular forms are free-form text in what are called the footnotes. You've got the face page of the document, which is standard,
Mm.
but it could be hundreds of pages of footnotes to it. What a
Right.
surprise that different accounting firms slightly worded them differently than EY did. So I dropped the ball my first year because anything that came in from Deloitte or PricewaterhouseCoopers or any of the other firms
Yeah.
might have, oh, short term. Is
Mm.
that one word? Is that a space between it? Is that a hyphen? Now, mind you, this was 2012 before machine learning was on the lips of anyone.
Yeah.
So we had to do that a bit more manually. But the point is, you learned it wasn't always going to be the same, and you learned from it. And the next year that was taken care of, and we were much more cognizant of one, looking at the variations, and two, testing with them, so we knew where the faults were, that we weren't picking up what we thought we would. And that's just common sense.
Yeah. I suppose that is one of the things where they could, instead of looking at the shiny object, use it as a practical because it is basically very good at reading and statistically saying, right, it's more likely this word is going to come in, and if you set it up correctly, it can also do data analysis. So I suppose that is one of the places where it could help. But I suppose then, if you were going to give somebody some advice, say a person that is 15, 20 years behind us, because we are somewhat older. I'll out myself and say I'm well over 50, so just so everybody knows, I'm not going to be asked Gary to do that. But if you're giving some advice to somebody that's sort of like you want to become a leader, what would be your suggestion to do that? And how did
Yeah,
this? Because I think everybody wants to be, possibly, go up in their career somehow, but how they actually start, I don't think very many people say, right, okay, I'd suggest you start to do this.
Well, and I guess this is how, whether consciously or unconsciously, I managed to get through all of this and learn from my mistakes and such.
Mm,
But you got to be spending time listening, asking questions, putting yourselves in the role of when I say clients, again, it could be people in your own firm or actual external clients if you're a vendor,
mm,
before assuming to know all the answers and proposing solutions. You know, I've made my mistakes over time where the old saying about assume what it does is, about making an arse out of you and me, if we're assuming things.
mm,
Um, it's and it's also, as a leader, I don't want to say just delegates, but you as a leader listen to the people who are working for you.
mm,
Nobody says you have to adopt everything that they say, but
mm,
show them the respect. If you want to be, what is the old saying, to evoke respect, you must respect. And show that respect, show that level of respect to the people who work for you, for the clients. Ask the open-ended questions. They may well have insights. They may be wrong, but the point is you don't know that until you ask the question, and there's always a pearl of wisdom in there somewhere that you can leverage.
mm,
And I've been very fortunate by taking that advice.
mm,
And I'm not even sure if it was someone who told me to provided me with that advice early on, but I got slapped down enough times where I didn't do it that you learn from making those mistakes. Um, it was, I wanted the reputation of, we're going to listen to you first before telling you what you should be doing,
mm,
and thereby had partners in different areas reaching out, hey, we'd like you to do this, or could you take a look at this, or things like that. Because I developed the reputation that I didn't have the quick fire answers for it. It was, I'm going to listen to what your issues are before presuming to know what they are. That's, listening is so key to all of this. And it's spending time with the people who work for you. Hey, what's working for them? What's not?
do,
Um,
do you
yeah,
think that
just
that
simply
is,
being open to those things will they'll work harder for you too as a result of all of that.
I mean, I've always sort of seen, when I looked at, because I have dyslexia. And by the way, just in case everybody says, it's not the LinkedIn kind, it's the one that really disrupts your life. So I have things like, tools that suggest tone and stuff like that when I'm writing, which, to tell you the truth, when it comes to leadership, very often I ignore because they say you need to sound certain all the time. But doesn't the implication that I get from the machine, in quotes, is that when I'm asking questions, that doesn't sound like leadership. But it sounds to me as though that you're saying that it is that.
It is the very epitome of leadership.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's you, but to me, it's the former is the epitome of arrogance.
I
And
agree.
oh, by the way, your audience will receive it that way.
I didn't say I listened to what
I
it
no,
suggests.
no, I know what you said. But that's the whole. If you want people to listen to you,
Hmm,
then listen to them.
yeah, yeah.
And there have been times where, well, we're not going to get into politics where somebody is absolutely positive and certain of something on day one,
Hmm,
and a year later when they're running for a different office, it's the opposite. Now that's okay if
hmm,
there's rationale for it rather than just playing to your audience.
hmm,
But those are the things where the expectation is you're learning from the people you're talking to. You've done your investigations. You've been open in listening to the people who work for you, because they're the ones doing the work, or are probably closer to the source.
hmm,
And again, like I said earlier, they may not always be right, but it's bears listening to. Either if there's something that's better, you learn from it, and if it doesn't work, well, hey, then you threw another, test. This was another way of testing out your approach to make sure that it was the right or is the right approach. And by the way, the approach today may not be the approach tomorrow, because when I'd written this thing on 5 steps, it was, you're going to listen, you're going to ask questions, you're going to confirm what you heard, you're going to act on it. No, by the way, rinse and repeat. Go back and repeat it, because the world's going to change over time. Example of it, we had different silos, and well, every large organization does, and they had the same product built differently for different parts of alternative investments. Hedge versus private equity is an example.
Well, same company,
Well,
different.
same company, same accounting firm,
Yeah.
had different silos. And by the way, they all do, because it's a
Yeah.
different expertise. That's okay.
Yeah.
But by not listening to each other, what
Mm.
a surprise when several years later, because the market had changed, you used to find distinctly either hedge funds or private equity.
Mm.
Now it's very often that those organizations are hybrids. They may be running hedge funds in one area and private equity in another area. And guess what? Now they have to use two different pieces of software that are doing the same thing, but with different field names and colors and all of that. And what a surprise that they're now saying, why do I have two different systems with the same name that don't look like each other?
I was just
The
about
world
to.
changed. If they had planned ahead, it would have been a no-brainer.
So, same company, same software name, different implementations.
Correct.
But, oh, wow. I think they're really happy.
It was like, hey, hedge meet private equity. Talk.
That sounds like a party introduction.
Something like that, yes. Now let's discuss.
Let's discuss. Sounds a bit like the life of
Well, it
Brian.
sounds like a technology version of an AA meeting.
All that. Yeah. Yes. I was wondering where that sounded familiar. Um, with some slightly different outcomes. I suppose the question that I always ask everybody now is there anything I should be asking you that I haven't asked?
Well, and I probably got a little ahead of myself, knowing that question was going to pop up at some point. But the discussion of the 5 steps to success that I
Mm,
alluded to earlier,
mm,
it's and this applies when I started writing this.
mm,
And I think it's our mutual friend Alan who led me down to this path a few months ago.
mm,
The I realized that the same rules: listen, ask, confirm, act, repeat, work the same whether you're in a consulting role, a product management or development role, product
mm,
marketing role, or a sales role.
yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Mm,
The we thought this was novel many, many, many years ago,
mm,
showing my age as well, when we called it consultative sales. And
mm,
consultative sales meant you didn't come in and immediately go to a demo.
mm,
You sat down on the same side of the table with the client, you took your jacket off, you rolled up your sleeves, and you asked questions. We're partnering with you. This is not an antagonistic or, not, this is not supposed to be, two different, going into battle.
yeah.
And the question was, ask the questions. What are your needs before we have products? Yes. Can't tell you the right one yet because you haven't told me what you needed. So why are we here today? And sometimes it's reactive. They have pain points in certain areas.
Mm,
Some of it is proactive. We're changing our markets. We're getting into a new product line. This is how we intend to expand. You don't know those things. If you don't know those things, how the heck are you supposed to recommend something to them? So that is the you know 5 simple rules, 5 simple words that each stand for You know, it's very simple stuff, but you got to do it. And you know, if you don't, and that's you know, I've given examples of that in some cases. You know, the demonstration that you and I have chatted about previously.
Mm.
Why, when somebody says you got to go in there and do a demo, there was one of the
An
firms,
awful lot of
one of the
people.
firms that I worked with. I said, before I will agree to a demo,
Hmm.
what are their needs?
Yeah,
Who's the decision maker?
yeah.
Um, you know, what is it? Pain points? Is it, you know, what are the issues that are leading to this? So you
Hmm.
know what will benefit them. Um, you know, there's an example for you know, difference between features and benefits.
Hmm.
We had a product, and I won't get into the gory details of it because it would get
Hmm.
too much tax technical. But
Hmm.
there are 15 different ways to do allocations.
Yeah.
Don't brag about the fact that your product does 15 ways of doing allocations. How
Doesn't
about
give them
you
what they need.
find out which ones of those your prospect uses and confirm that your product actually handles it? Because they don't give a whatever about the other 12. You know, it's just focus.
Do you think maybe this is because in you know in sort of our area where a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is cognitive and it's services and um, it's not necessarily product based in the sense that it's something physically that goes out the door. Do you think we've lost something there? Because it seems to me that if I go, so for example, my grandfather was a carpenter. He had a very simple way of looking at things, and what you're talking about, he would just do by standing outside and chatting to the person. You know, all the different things that people are, maybe we're just trying to make business just a bit too complicated. Do you think that's true to a certain extent? Because we're smart, we like to make it complicated.
Well, certainly there are groups that will do so for a number of different reasons,
Hmm.
making your group more important. It's if you make it more complex and you're billing out by the hour, that's an advantage to you. But if you think about it, how much the world has changed from a no, a physical product. You built a
Yeah.
car, you built a house,
Yeah.
versus now we're selling services.
Hmm.
Hey, computer programs not building that house. Well, I guess you can get to that point with AI now that it might well be in the future.
They
But
will be in, I think, 6 months. They've got the printers that print in concrete, and they're just about to use. I've seen a company that started, and they're bringing it onto the market in 6 months. That'll print a whole house from blueprints.
well, and shout out to a gentleman I met. God, this would have been in the 80s,
Hmm.
that I was working for, who later on, when he retired, he bought a home. It
Hmm.
was like 18th century or 19, yeah, I guess 19th century German architecture, and uh, he wanted to build a German style parquet floor in the third floor was a ballroom in this magnificent house out in a very small town.
Hmm.
And he said, I could do this by hand, but wait a minute. I've got, and it may well have been a Macintosh, and I'm not bragging about any particular vendor here, but
Hmm.
he got the specs, and then he could feed into it. Here's the dimensions of the room I'm looking for.
Hmm.
And he somehow, this was early stuff, wired it into a laser cutter that cut each individual piece. So it wasn't like you know, these days you go by parquet floors and 1 foot squares, and it has all the different pieces in there. But
Hmm.
here, each parquet piece was being done. Now, this was brand new. Now, he did it because he didn't want to have to cut all this stuff himself. And then he turned it into a business because there were other places that when they heard about it, it was, wait, yeah, you could do this? And there's some very famous floors that he ended up doing before selling that business and retired
I would
once
say
again.
that's probably still around if it's using
Oh, yeah.
laser methods. My guess.
but that was something new. But yeah, I guess I sort of went off track. The difference between services, when you're selling software, it's
mm,
in the ether.
yeah,
There's nothing tangible, and I fully recognize that. And this didn't start till before I got into working with alternatives.
mm,
I worked probably the only time in my life I worked for a firm. It was a commercial printer,
mm,
and we built a 250,000 square foot warehouse that would take in orders from our clients and distribute things that we printed and other material
mm,
to 15,000 orders a day.
mm,
And it was, I mean, I was very proud to do this. I worked on the technology that supported it,
mm,
but in the end, we built a 250,000 square foot warehouse that shoved out 15,000 orders a day into 25 bays of semi trailer trucks that would be delivered throughout the United States.
mm,
That was a lot of fun because I
mm,
could I could get my arms around what it was.
yeah,
It's tougher to explain. My dad was a pharmacist, and he would
yeah,
try to explain to people what I did for a living. And he says, "Well, my son's in technology."
yeah,
And I said to my father, uh, I think I mentioned to you in the early days of mail order prescriptions, he was
mm,
involved in it in a family pharmacy. But I
yeah,
pointed out to him, I said, "Do you use an automated, pill counter?" Well, yeah, now that my volumes are up. And you've got something that pre-prints the labels that
mm,
sends out. Yeah. I said, "Dad, you're in technology."
yeah,
Oh, yeah, I guess, and I said, "Different world, perhaps more simple, but you're
mm,
using technology. We're all
mm,
using technology now. Your kids doing their homework are using technology for everything from research to producing the paper or the homework or whatever."
mm,
So, but I think a long-winded answer to your question, I think that, it gets more complex. The old, uh, "Hey, we built something." What's the old saying about, if I've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and you're trying to apply it to other places where it just doesn't make sense to fit. Maybe you can change it or tweak it or whatever that so it serves a wider audience. Those
mm.
are things you have to consider.
So do you think then that that is one of the reasons? So I mean, I've seen over the years, because I've been in tech for a long time, I've seen everything from venture capital-based companies to leverage buyouts, businesses that bootstrap themselves, and the success rate of tech companies, although people wouldn't like to believe it, it's something like 1 in a million. It's ridiculously small. But do you think that that is not so much a case of have we got money, have we got the right skills? It's are we actually solving a problem that isn't just me too? Like,
Well, and well, or over,
my
yeah,
mum and whoever said that's a great thing.
well, yeah, or overestimating your market.
Yeah.
It's there's a saying in with private wealth family offices,
Mm,
and it's not necessarily accurate, but to some extent it is,
mm,
that some of the people who are wiser than I am have said, "Well, when you've seen one private wealth family office, you've seen one private wealth family office," because each of them focuses on different things, different types of investments, different numbers of generations that are part of it. And you can run a family office with 3 people. There are others that run it with 50, because depending on what they're doing. So you
mm,
have to understand not just your one client that you now think you could turn this into 1,000,
mm,
but step back and understand what that market is to see if that's viable. And I think that's part of the reason for the failure rate. And it's not always immediate. "Hey,
mm,
we've found this one client who likes what we've done," and they talk to their friends or their colleagues or others in the same area, and
mm.
you grow the business. But like I mentioned before about how those types of fund managers change, stuff changes over time. You've got to be prepared, nimble enough to change your product to address those new things
Which means asking those questions. I think this is one of the
early on.
things
Yeah.
people never understood, because I'd go back to clients and ask them the same set of questions, like after 12 months. And obviously, 99% of the time, boredom. Like, you've asked us this before, why are you doing that again? I said, just making sure nothing's changed. But every now and again, so for example, there'd been one customer that had been loyal to the particular company that I was involved with for years, literally. They'd been together for, they were B2B business partners. They referred each other, they gave each other business. But they'd never changed. The services are always been, in quotes, on paper the same. And then at some point their business changed. And they began to say, right, okay, this is, and became unhappy. And at some point, I was going through my set of questions, after fixing all of the problems that they had because nobody had been listening. And I said, do you actually need this 100-page report? And the person that was actually going to receive and use the report that we were giving them, he says, I use these 18 pages. So that literally the whole rat's tail that we produced was totally irrelevant to them. Which I wonder how often we do that in business by just adding, a little bit more gets added on because we think it's adding value. Now, how would you see that the importance of value against cost of things? Because I mean, this is one of the things I think certainly in software and services, it's very difficult to engage, sort of discuss what is value and what is price and what is cost. So maybe you'd just like to, through your wisdom, since you have that type of background, how would you see that?
Well, I want to take a slightly different perspective on it. There's when your client, again, could be internal, could be external, says, this is what I need. I need it quickly. Yeah, I need it quickly. I need it cheap, inexpensively, whatever. And there were always the three questions that I would respond back with. I can give it to you, I can give it to you inexpensively. I can give it to you quickly, or I can give it to you right. I cannot do all three. Now, I used to be a pilot many years ago, and the one thing that was very that I remember back from the days where you could put on your headset on the plane and you could hear the air traffic control. And we were flying back on, it was probably then a 747. I may have been coming back from Europe, I'm not sure. And coming into O'Hare, which unsurprisingly things were slowing down. I don't remember, it was storms or whatever. And air traffic control in Michigan approach into O'Hare said, to our pilot, I'd like you to climb and maintain this altitude and reduce your airspeed to 250 knots. And, it was funny because it was just like the old, everybody thinks that everybody sounds like Chuck Yeager with the Oklahoma accent, and I was a pilot. And I can hear my pilot say, ma'am, I can increase altitude to 35,000 and I can decrease, this is a 747. I can increase altitude to 35,000. I can reduce airspeed to 200 knots. I cannot do both. Choose. And and I think of that story when I have a client saying, I need it yesterday. I need it. It's got to be absolutely accurate. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to pay up, only this much money. You can't get all of those three things done at the same time. And it's the same way, akin to what you were, the example that you'd given a couple of minutes ago. You got to make a decision here. I'm going to either have to throw a lot of people into it, putting in overtime, or it's going to take 2 weeks longer because of these changes you made, or whatever whatever comes into play. But you can't get all three of those in the same ask. Now you have to be a lot more diplomatic in how you share that information,
Yeah,
like that
yeah,
pilot.
of
But
course. So that segues quite nicely into this one, which is what do most people get wrong in your industry? We've
well,
almost
I,
exclusively been talking about, but is there one specific pet peeve that you say they get this wrong, and we've been doing it, and we're still maybe still even that you've seen they still do it?
well, and some of this is rehashing we've just talked about a little bit
Yeah.
earlier, but they're focusing on the wrong things. Instead of focusing on setting priorities or identifying major pain points or being forward thinking on how their business is changing,
Hmm.
uh, you need to do those things, and then once you've actually spent the time on it, whether you're doing it internally or you've engaged a consultant to do it for you, perform a formal operations assessment, or if you prefer, optimization audit, which is another take on the same language.
Hmm.
And it's got to span your people, the processes they use, and their technology. It's I'm not saying that there's always something that has to be done and it's going to cost big money or whatever, but take the time to understand what the issues are, discuss what could be done to do so. You can do this in a smaller firm with less complex operations. Assign somebody, to step aside from their duties and focus on that and give them latitude to ask questions wherever they see fit. And for more complex operations, engage a consultant. Could be somebody like me, could be part of a larger firm, whatever, but to conduct an unbiased independent review. If you got problems, do something about it. And
I
this is one of the ways you could approach them.
hmm. I heard a very interesting suggestion from somebody, which I thought was quite intelligent, was to ask the youngest people that get hired in the company to take note of what they're seeing in the company when they come in and then collate all that information because they've got that new brain, new eyes,
Absolutely.
no clue what's happening. But
Not
I
not
think,
not yeah, you're not prejudiced by
yeah,
the time spent. Yep.
yeah. And also because if you think about Gen Z, they're saying we're not having impact. That then gives them that you can literally say you are going to have an impact. We would like to know from you how you find all of this, which is something that I thought was I thought that was a quite smart suggestion. So
Truly.
would you consider that to be a good idea if you, or what would be your suggestion if you were talking about working with Gen Z or the younger generations? Because I know of some people that certainly our age and maybe a bit older find that really difficult. I don't know
Well,
whether it's true or not, to tell you the
it
truth.
it's look at it. First of all, I like the idea. Uh,
Hmm.
to me, it's an obvious play.
Hmm.
I've been in companies where there's a suggestion box and there's a company get together or a unit
Hmm.
get together every several weeks and they open up the box and it could be anonymous and whatever and they'll talk about every comment that was made. Well, the
Hmm.
point is, if you've got an issue, if we're giving you the authority to look into this,
Hmm.
then either stop complaining about it. Tell us what you would do. Tell us
Yeah.
where you think the funds should be spent to improve something and what the impact is going to be. Don't just do it because you think this is a lousy way of doing things. Tell me as you bring these things up. You may not have the answer, but
Hmm.
show the issues and what you believe is the impact on productivity or
Hmm.
whatever, or whether it's productivity or whether it's accuracy. And by the way, if it's inaccurate, then guess what? There's you know trashing your productivity because you're having to do it over. Um, I think it's a great. I mean, it's a great idea.
Hmm.
And make that you've like what I was talking about before. You're investing them in the success of their group or the firm.
Hmm.
Uh, what it's it makes a lot of sense.
Hmm. I'll tell him that. That'll make him happy.
There you go.
Okay, and with that that wraps up the session, unless there's anything you would like to say. And obviously, I'm going to ask you, how should people get in touch with you? What's the best place to get in touch with you? So what would be your answer there, just to make sure that's right on the end, just in case somebody does skip and look?
No, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I very much enjoyed our conversation last week, and uh, how this was done today wasn't simply a rehash of that conversation, but delved into new areas, and I hope our audience enjoyed it as much as I did. As far as reaching out to me, the easiest way to do so is it's Gary A. Mills on LinkedIn. There's also Gary Mills Consulting LLC, and you reach out to me through those things. It's again I'm sort of on two tracks these days in our conversation. This wasn't specific to the audience that I'm working with as clientele, but the experience spans beyond that. It's simply consulting in general. It's not specific to what I've done, what I'm doing these days, and would certainly entertain going above and beyond that, because it's been a heck of a ride, and I've had fun with it. And if there are people just want to talk, happy to do so.
Right, yeah. Then I would just like to say thank you very much, Gary. Really appreciate you, mate. It's nice to know I'm not alone and I'm not been going mad over the last 20 odd years. Because sometimes I thought I was for asking all the questions that I used to ask, and everybody called me crazy. So I appreciate you for taking the time, sharing your wisdom with me. Thank you very much. If I do get any requests from anybody else asking to get in touch, I'll make sure that I send them.
Excellent. Very kind of you. Thanks so much.
Right. And you just hang on for a second, just to make sure that technology has got to sync, so I can end the session.